Welcome. I am Rhonda Salerno. I'm the chair of the Planning Advisory Board to the City of Langley, and I am so pleased to be your host tonight. I'm heartened to see so many join us here while we tackle the very important topic of creating and maintaining housing that meets the needs of all of our citizens. We have brought together some of the leading experts in the field from both near and far to help us explore some tools and strategies today that we may want to consider implementing as a community. We are so grateful for their generous offer to be with us tonight. Here on the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish, we are taking to heart our responsibility to one another and to the earth that provides so much for us. I'd like to introduce to you, and so let's see, is our PowerPoint coming up now? I'm going to ask Greg to get that going. Are you having a hard time there, Greg? Could you unmute? Here we go. Thank you very much. Let's wait till it gets in a mode of view full screen and we'll continue on. Okay, so our welcome has happened, and now I would like to introduce to you the folks who have poured their heart and soul into bringing this program together tonight. We have the title of the Affordable Housing Working Group of Langley's Planning Advisory Board, mentioned as PAB in further communication. This group was formed for the sole task of bringing the community together in the interest of exploring the needs and strategies of affordability in our small village by the sea of 1,190 people and our close neighbors. Will you please, with a show of hands, identify yourself, team? All right, so you'll get to hear from everyone, so you'll know who they are. And I want Alex, would you please raise your hand? Alex is providing his great expertise in holding the tech aspect of our presentation. All right. So this is the second of two meetings. Our first meeting on May 25th this year focused on the needs and challenges of affordable housing in the greater Langley area. The purpose of this meeting is to identify, to get the purpose, Greg? If you could go to the next slide, please. Okay, Greg, I cannot hear you, but would you be able to move forward?
Let me share the screen from the beginning.
So we should have gone back one. There should be a purpose one in there. Greg.
Maybe we should just keep going, Rhonda.
Okay, so I'll just read the purpose. When it comes up, we'll just go by it quickly. The purpose of this meeting is to identify potential strategies and tools to meet specific needs for affordable housing in the Langley area. And here on the screen, as you see, are some few housekeeping tasks to facilitate our meeting tonight. We will not be hosting a chat, but instead would like to invite participants to put questions that may arise throughout our presentation in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Toward the end of our evening, we will offer the opportunity for our panelists to address a few of these pertinent questions, and those that are not answered tonight will be answered and sent out in a follow-up communication to you all, and will appear in documentation on our city website, along with the recording of this meeting of slides that you will be seeing tonight. Can we get to the agenda slide? I can just read it if we can't find it. So a quick look at our agenda tonight. We're going to recap the first meeting, and we have an overview of tools. We have nonprofit housing being represented, county programs and city code, inclusionary zoning, community land trusts, Habitat for Humanity, capacity for tax support, and our conclusion. So I'm going to go ahead while Greg figures out the PowerPoint. I'm sorry, we're having a glitch here. And, you know, maybe we switch, and Brigid, is yours going to work a little easier? There you go. We got the agenda. Okay, there's the agenda. And I'd like now to introduce you. I'm so proud to introduce you to our new mayor and true advocate of affordable housing, Scott Chaplin. In January of this year, Scott introduced himself to our city council and PAB by authoring a letter regarding a strategy that the city might utilize to tackle the affordable housing crisis that we now face. When we were forming the Affordable Housing Working Group, I approached him to join as a citizen who had experience with the topic. He agreed to join us and has been invaluable to our efforts here. Since then, Scott has been appointed mayor of the city of Langley, to our great fortune, and is continuing his commitment to this need. So now, with immense gratitude, let me turn it over to our mayor, Scott Chaplin, for an introduction and a recap of our first event.
Thank you, Rhonda, and it's really an honor to be in front of you all tonight, and to have worked with the team. It was just an amazing team. It was kind of like a dream team. We met for about 8 months, almost 4 times a week, about an hour and a half each time, sometimes longer. So it's about 240 person hours of the 5 people that were involved. If that was a consulting rate, that would be, you know, if it was $40, it would be $10,000, but it would probably be closer to $20,000 of time put into this effort, donated by volunteers. And I think you'll probably be happy with what we've come up with. And I encourage you, I'm just going to go very briefly through the report that was the result of our May 25th meeting on the affordable housing challenges. And I think everyone agrees that they are challenges out there, but sometimes it's good to document them. And so we did some public opinion polls. This is just one of the many graphs that came out of that. And, you know, are there enough housing options for renters? The public opinion was no. Business owners said, do your employees have housing related issues? Yes, that was the answer, loud and clear. Next slide, please. We actually had 3 very nice testimonials of people from business owners from the community that came forward. Everyone, I think, is familiar with the Langley Bistro, and she owns 2 other restaurants in town, and they're desperately looking for housing for their workers. At the post office, one of the workers who came recently had to live in a van for a while. And then the school district, which is, and Mary Michelle, who's also with Readiness to Learn, kind of wears 2 hats. But so she's seen a huge increase in the number of people living in trailers and RVs right in this area. This isn't Seattle we're talking about. This is here on South Whidbey. And then the school district is having trouble hiring teachers and keeping them because of the price of housing. Next, please. Just the general trends, housing prices are going up, homes for sale are going down, same things happening in the rental market. Next, please. If you like statistics, we had Gregory Easton, an economist, who did not economize on the statistics at all. This report is full of all the numbers you might want, and we looked at both state of Washington, Island County, and Langley, so you can get some nice comparisons there. Next, please. The common goal we had, though, is we really want this community to be a place where teachers, elderly residents on fixed incomes, hospital workers, firefighters, nonprofit workers, and others can live and raise families affordably. Next slide, please. Some of the takeaways from the Housing Challenge report were that most of the seniors are in our area rely on the private housing market, and our community is becoming less and less diverse with fewer and fewer families with school-age children, and the lack of housing is really hurting employers. And then how is the market responding? Is it doing what it's supposed to meet the need? And actually, it's going in the other direction. Unfortunately, our stock is mostly single family in this area. We haven't had a lot of increase in affordable units. But making things worse, the demand for second homes and short-term rentals is really impacting the market. And we really haven't had any rental units built for 2 decades in the Langley area. And there's very few rentals available, period. Next slide, please. So from that initial report, the recommendation was to, and this was presented to the by the PAB to the Langley City Council in August. And the recommendation was to pursue a real wide range. So we want to cover everything, the rentals to for sale, really meet the needs of working people and others. And then to focus on the small rental units that are below the 80% AMI, and then for sale units up that are below 100% of AMI, and then maybe a little bit higher for people who already have one home but are trying to move up to a larger home if they have a family or something. And I think the final takeaway for me in some ways is we just have to stop studying this issue and then really start building. Other communities have been very successful at creating affordable housing. And so next slide, please. So the questions I think about, well, how many units do we need? And just off the top of my head, I think we need somewhere between 100 and 300 new units on South Whidbey in the very near future. So what does that look like? How many in Langley? How many outside? Do we do transit-oriented development? How can we save costs? Who are the partners going to be? Is it going to be public-private partnerships? Are we just going to rely on nonprofits? And what's it going to cost? Who's going to pay? Right now, we're looking at construction costs. Some people are saying upwards of $500. Even if we can get it at $300 a square foot, it's still pretty expensive. And then we need to move beyond volunteer committees like the one that put together this report. We need to start having paid professionals do this. The rules of thumb are, most affordable housing agencies don't really think it's worthwhile unless they have at least 250 units. So that's one rule of thumb. So that's it for me. And our next speaker is Carl Schroeder from the Association of Washington Cities. It's an amazing organization that provides advice to local government agencies. So take it away, Carl.
Thank you, Mayor Chaplin. I appreciate the invitation to share a few thoughts with your committee here. And it's pretty encouraging to see, what are we at, 93 folks watching this meeting and all the good work that you just described. The work that I do as Deputy Government Relations Director for AWC, I have focused on housing and homelessness issues for the last decade. And it used to be one of these things that you would hear a lot about from the Central Puget Sound, the very largest cities. And we've seen over the last, half decade at least, and probably a little bit longer, an increasingly urgent need to address housing issues in all sizes and shapes of communities all around the state. So you're in good company, although it's a challenging issue, as I know you all are dealing with. You can move to the next slide, Greg. I will just share for those of you who don't know briefly, AWC is an organization that's been around since the 1930s. Our membership is 100% of the 281 cities in the state. we work on a variety of different issues. My focus is on land use and environment, and as I mentioned, housing, and we've got a number of other folks who work with the state legislature on behalf of cities to try to advance policies that give you the tools and support necessary to address the goals of the community, like improving your housing situation. So I'm not going to belabor all the statistics. I think you all know the challenge that you've got, but again, 80%, 82% of the cities who responded to a survey we did last year indicated that a lack of affordable housing was a problem in their community. 72% specifically feel like they're lacking low-income housing, which we put in the box of 80% or below of the area median income. And generally speaking, as the mayor was talking about rules of thumb, most of that type of housing needs to be supported with public subsidy or nonprofit subsidy, or somebody that's helping back up the rents that can't be charged to folks who make too low of an income. And that's a real challenge. And I'm glad to see that you've got some housing developers on the agenda today who can help walk you through what it takes to partner to bring those resources to bear. One of the challenges that we have at the advocating at the state level is there's this belief that if cities just sort of made different decisions to welcome growth, we would solve this problem. And we think it's significantly more complicated than that. Was encouraged to see that you've got some market research as part of your information that was generated after the first meeting, and that's the sort of advice that we would provide to cities as you work towards developing a local plan here to really hone in on what your real estate market is reacting to and what the particulars of that are. Greg, go ahead and move to the next slide. Again, the mayor kind of touched on this. We're seeing the number of homes for sale declining. The price has doubled over the last 8 years. Those of you who are homeowners have probably seen this, especially those who may have children who are trying to get into the first time home market. It's very tight. The things that are affordable to folks at the medium and low end of the income spectrum are few and far between. I would imagine Langley is particularly challenged by that, given the natural beauty and the sort of vacation environment that you referred to with the short-term rental issues. Again, this was just to establish the challenge. So Greg, you can move forward here. One of the unique features of Washington is, you think of King County and Seattle as the epicenter of the housing affordability challenge, but they've actually got a higher vacancy rate than most of the outskirts, most of the rural areas, most of the counties outside of the Puget Sound region have extremely tight vacancy rates, sometimes as low as 1% or below. And the rule of thumb again has been somewhere in that 5 to 7% ratio is what's considered a natural vacancy rate, and below that you start to see an upward pressure on rental prices. So we've seen that over the period of time as well. I didn't put this on this slide, I don't think, but we've seen an increase in recent years of, the average one-bedroom home price in the state, or one-bedroom apartment, I should say, in the state, moving from about $1,300 to $1,800 a month, which is a real significant change, obviously, for folks who are already housing stressed. And you showed some statistics about the percentage of your renters who are paying more than 30% of their income to rent. So that's a real challenge as well. Greg, if you want to move to the next slide. So one of the things that we do is work with the state to try to provide as many tools as possible for cities who want to tackle these challenges. And the committee asked me to give a quick overview and maybe some examples of cities who are using some of these tools. And so that will be the bulk of what I talk about for the rest of the presentation. A new opportunity for cities the size of Langley is the multifamily tax exemption, which had previously been limited to only larger cities in the state. So this is a program, optional program for cities to offer basically an exemption for the value of the improvements, the building on the land to incentivize multifamily construction. For the larger cities, there's an option for an 8-year program that's just market rate, does not have to have any affordability requirements. The legislature recently extended this program to the smaller cities, but that is only available if there is an affordability component. And the threshold, I believe, is 20% of the units have to be affordable at 80% of the area median income or below. So again, that's the sort of top end of the low income housing range. Some of the features that cities look at when they're thinking about their MFDE programs is, is the market already creating these apartment buildings? Are we providing a tax incentive that isn't actually incentivizing new behavior? That's something that cities want to avoid, right? You want to target this to help your developers stretch into the affordable components while maximizing public benefit. But if you go too far in that direction, it's a voluntary program. So you need to have developers who are able to both set aside a portion of units with a lower rent, as well as continue to make a profit and want to voluntarily participate in the program. But since that's something that's newly authorized for smaller cities, I would think that would be worth taking a look at, especially with the information from the mayor that you've not seen a lot of rental properties constructed recently. House Bill 1406 is not relevant for your situation any longer. There was a time-limited opportunity to opt into some sales tax dollars from the state. Doesn't look like Langley did that at the time, and that window has closed. So the other options that are particularly common from cities are the next two, and particularly the sales tax. Property tax levies, there's two means for cities to levy property tax assessments to support affordable housing. The direct one that's associated with housing, as it says there, is 50 cents per thousand to fund housing construction and foreclosure prevention activities for low-income home ownership, as well as rentals. There's also an ability to just do a levy lid lift and ask your constituents for breaking the 1% property tax limit for a particular purpose for, I think it's 7 years. That's how the city of Seattle operates their housing levy. The other cities that operate property tax-based housing levies are under the 50 cents per thousand mechanism. Another change that was made recently that we've seen a lot of uptake from cities on is the 1/10 of 1 cent councilmanic sales tax that can support affordable housing as well as behavioral health purposes. This is an authority that had been around for several years, but until 2 years ago required a vote of the people to establish this 1/10. Now that can be done just with city council action. And so, the first city that used this authority when it was a vote of the people was the city of Ellensburg, which you might not think of as a hot button of progressive housing policy and love of taxation, so to speak. But they dealt with really challenging increases in their rental rates. They don't actually have a very profound homelessness challenge. They're more challenged by just the cost of renting. So that's another thing for you to think about, how to sell this to the community and whether there's particular elements that are at play there. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. There's also the ability to use a portion of your real estate excise tax for affordable housing purposes. This is tax that's already being collected, so it's not a new tax, but it's generally in the past been required to be dedicated to cities' capital facilities needs, and basically infrastructure that supports housing development is the way that the realtors, who are obviously a large stakeholder in Olympia, they feel a large degree of ownership over this tax. And so there's a lot of debates every time it gets touched about, is the use of that something that's supporting the sale and robustness of the real estate market. That's why it had been focused on infrastructure to support housing in the past. But in recognition of the homelessness and affordable housing challenge, I think it was 2019, the state provided the authority to use up to 25% or $1 million, whichever is larger, per year of your second quarter of the real estate excise tax for a variety of housing purposes. Another thing that is pretty common is for cities to take a look at their development fees and impact fees, sewer connection charges, that sort of thing, and develop programs to either reduce or waive those for certain types of housing purposes. So Greg, if you want to move forward, here's just a sense of kind of which of these are most popular. This is not comprehensive information on some of the pieces like the development waivers and REIT. This is self-reported survey information from our membership. On the other elements, those are raw numbers, at least as of late 2020. Greg, if you want to move forward, you guys can take a look at that at your leisure. So I was trying to pull out some cities who are not the larger ones, who share some characteristics with Langley for you to consider reaching out to or taking a look at the way they structure these programs if they're of interest to you all. Again, on MFTE, it's really about trying to figure out how to get as aligned as possible with the market and push that public benefit to the extent it can be provided without going over and inadvertently making it a program that the developers don't want to voluntarily participate in. And again, for Langley, that would be a 12-year exemption from property tax for the buildings associated with a new multifamily construction. And 20% of those units would have to be affordable. You don't have to do that over the whole city. So there's opportunities. You mentioned transit-oriented development. That's a pretty common one that cities look to authorize these sorts of incentives only in the areas where they're really trying to see this type of development, not everywhere. Or in some cases like Shoreline, they'll even have different standards for different parts of this city to try to provide more incentive for certain areas and less than others. But you can see that you've got a number of relatively smaller cities who have taken advantage of this program. I mentioned the sales tax and Ellensburg. This is pretty flexible. So for instance, East Wenatchee partnered with Wenatchee. Both city councils have adopted this within the last month or so. And what they're looking to do is they have I think it's roughly 88 or somewhere in the low 90s point in time count for homeless individuals in Wenatchee and East Wenatchee. And so they believe with the resources that are going to be generated by this sales tax that they should be able to create at least temporary shelter for the entire homeless population in the Wenatchee Valley. They're pursuing a sort of a hardened shelter approach, the pallet housing. So these are not, stick-built homes. On the other hand, Olympia is building what is more common, in my experience, at least, permanent supportive housing, more of a traditional apartment building with space for services and the wraparound support that some of the chronic homeless, really need in order to be successful. I mentioned Ellensburg on the flip side, without that homelessness driver, and really focused more on affordable apartments and rentals. So that sales tax can be really flexible if that's a direction that you want to consider. The other thing I just want to share, and with the sort of vacation rental nature of Langley and bringing in folks who don't live in the community on a semi-regular basis. That was actually part of the appeal in Ellensburg, as I've been told, is that they've got a itinerant college population. They're a stop along I-90 that's very common for folks who are traveling throughout the state, and that they had done some analysis of their percentage of their sales tax that was paid for by folks who didn't live in Ellensburg or didn't live year-round in Ellensburg. And that was something that they used to help support building public support for the effort. I mentioned, or I should say, the property tax ones here, much larger cities. I'm not exactly sure why we've seen that as a tool that so far has been mostly limited to larger cities, but it does seem to be the case that the smaller communities are gravitating towards some of the other options. Again, that's fairly flexible dollars. I wasn't able to get this on the draft that I sent to Greg yesterday, but I just wanted to rattle off a couple of cities who have pursued the fee waivers and reductions. White Salmon, Prosser, Leavenworth, Ferndale. So again, not necessarily large cities who have oodles of money to just not have resources coming in to address their needs, but those that have, chosen that this is a priority for them. Greg, if you want to move to the next slide. So I talked about a number of the sort of fiscal tools, how to generate revenue. I should say that it's also common in some communities just to spend general fund to make investments in partner organizations. Many cities are not in a position to do that, but in addition to the fiscal side, we've seen quite a lot of interest in pursuing sort of more policy-based responses to try to help increase development capacity. So there's the missing middle and authorizing duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes in traditional single-family neighborhoods. It's really seen as an opportunity to open up those areas to new residents who might otherwise not be able to afford a large single-family home. That can be controversial with existing community members sometimes, similar with ADUs or mother-in-law apartments. But done right, and with we think the ability to manage some of the aesthetics and infrastructure and parking issues, those can be tools to get better use out of your existing neighborhoods and see development in slightly different areas. The state has been also funding what they're calling housing action plans for the last several years for cities to do just the work that you're doing. Maybe you guys are using one of these grants actually, but to support like a multi-stakeholder effort to generate, again, what you guys are pursuing, which is locally developed housing approaches. We see the density and affordable housing bonuses. So another strategy is to provide, say, more floors on a building, more bulk, smaller setbacks so that the buildings can be larger on an existing lot in exchange for a dedication of a portion of the housing that's created for affordability. I saw in a survey that Langley had reported at one point that you guys had some degree of mandatory affordability, but I couldn't capture where that was, and maybe that was just a misclick somewhere along the way. And again, just generally upzoning is something that many cities are pursuing, especially around transit or other services that can help effectively take that growth and help people get around the community and get the services that they need. Greg, go ahead and move me along one. So this is, sorry, that's terrible to read. I didn't realize it was that small. These are recent actions that cities have been taking. So lots of cities reviewing their development regulations, looking for quirks that are making it difficult to get through the permitting process. Your planning staff, I'm sure, could share with you what they're hearing from the local builders, et cetera. Some communities are finding that there are, old codes that haven't been updated in too long and truly do provide a disincentive or a slowdown in the process. One really pertinent example is SEPA. So the State Environmental Policy Act, one of our core environmental regulations, which requires governmental actions to consider the environmental impact and evaluate those before they're approved. There are opportunities to exempt housing development from that SEPA review in certain circumstances. And you still have to be able to show that you're protecting the elements of the environment, that you've got other codes that handle stormwater impacts or traffic, etc. But if you do have those and you can document that, then you can take SEPA off the list of what your developers have to go through in order to generate a subdivision or build a multifamily apartment building. So that's a tool that many cities have pursued and have utilized. And it's tends to be pretty popular with the building community because SEPA can be a bit of a point in the process where there's uncertainty and time delays, and that can be, obviously that's a problem for development. I mentioned the housing action plans, authorizing new housing types again in the single family zones. And then I don't know if you have an opportunity for this in Island County, but there are a growing number of multi-jurisdictional regional groups of cities and sometimes cities and counties that are working together to address their regional housing needs. So this I think the most famous version of this is called ARCH, a regional coalition for housing in East King County. There's now a South King County version. Pierce County cities and towns are working with the county to start a Pierce County version of this. Snohomish County has one. And I think if you were to reach out to your peers, they find that to be really helpful. It can be beneficial for cities in particular who don't have a lot of staff, because they can have a function where they provide like a shared housing policy staff across multiple jurisdictions that can help do the code updates and to help provide some consistency for the building community in the region, et cetera. Another feature of many of these is a regional housing trust fund where investments can be made in capital construction, and they kind of rotate around the jurisdictions to provide some, I guess, equity or evenness in where the investments happen. The benefit of that for a small city, again, is if you don't have enough money to put, be a major player in the investment of a capital construction, if you can pool your resources with the region, and become part of a rotating set of investments, that can be something that's very positive. Greg, go ahead and move me on to the next one. Well, I'm running through these kind of quickly, so I hope I'm giving you the information that you want. Just a few other points, and then I'm happy to answer any questions that this may have raised for you. So 2022 legislative session is unfortunately right around the corner. Got about 3 months until January. Cities have been, as I mentioned at one point earlier on, under a lot of pressure from the state to open up housing opportunities. Some estimates are as many as 225,000 rental units behind what would be needed for the population growth over the last decade, and that the vast majority of those are needed for those in the low income spectrums, 80% and below. So there's this major gap in housing supply, which is driving the affordability challenges, it's driving the rental costs, and a feeling that cities need to do more to accept more growth, to facilitate more growth, and do the kind of work that you all are doing. The challenge that we have as an organization that represents cities is the state sort of looks for a silver bullet. This one policy, if you did this, you would solve our problems. And that may work in some communities and it just may not in others. But two of those that are on the menu are more specificity that cities have to require or allow, I should say, accessory dwelling units in all cases, attached and detached on all parcels. That's kind of the more extreme version of that. No ability to have on-site parking requirements or owner occupancy requirements or some of the other policy tools that some cities use. And then a similar potential effort to eliminate solely single-family residential zoning and to require at least the duplex through, there's lots of variations of this, but the details haven't emerged, but at least duplexes on every parcel is what we're expecting. Again, I think that in a lot of cases, that's the right thing to do. And there's a lot of history around why we should be opening up more opportunities into neighborhoods. But the local democracy element is challenging, and cities, by and large, feel like they need enough latitude to pursue their own, regional and unique needs. And that one of these one-size-fits-all solutions is not necessarily going to be the best. So that's a lot of information. I feel like I've kind of blown out on you, but hopefully it's been helpful. And I am happy to answer any questions about any of these tools or any other goings on in Olympia or anything else I can be helpful with.
Thank you, Carl. That was wonderful. You are a wealth of information for us, and we hope to call upon you in the future if we can. We are going to have time to answer questions, but we're going to cut into that time a little bit since we're running behind. So if we don't answer them tonight, we will get them back to folks in a written form. So I'm going to quickly go on and thank you for that overview and introduce our next guest, Melora Hiller. I want to assure everyone that they have the allotted time that they were given. If you could look at your clocks and try to stick to that, it would be great. And I don't want to interrupt anyone. You all have such great things to share with us. So Melora, Melora is the co-chair of Housing Lopez and a housing consultant. And we're so fortunate to have you with us, Melora. Take it away.
Thank you. I am really pleased to be here and excited that Langley is working on this issue. We have a lot in common, Lopez Island and Langley and Whidbey more generally. And unfortunately, a lot of the challenges are the same. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on housing need, but we have people living in really awful situations. We have people who have to move 3 and 4 times a year. And we have a lot of people who they can't, employers who can't fill positions like the school superintendent or the fire chief or people, positions like that, because those people have nowhere to live. And really, what we're doing is going to be a small drop in the bucket of the need, but we're going to persevere. So Housing Lopez was incorporated in 2019, but really started actively working on this issue in 2015 when the executive director of the Family Resource Center kind of convened this group of people. And she had already done a lot of homework. She had talked to a lot of nonprofit housing developers, basically all over the state, and asked them if they would come and develop on Lopez Island. They all said no. She asked the local community land trust if they would do some rental housing, and they said no. And so finally, that group decided they were going to have to do it themselves, and they incorporated. And luckily, it was a group of people, I'll talk about this later, but a group of people that had really the right skill set. So to be able to pull this off. Can you move the slide, please? So development challenges on Lopez are probably similar to what you experience. Density is severely limited, and restricted land, property that can have housing on it is very restricted. We're trying to protect our agricultural lands. So that creates some problems, and there's very few properties for sale that aren't already developed. So it's really a challenge. Finding the sweet spot for funding really refers to being able to build the kind of housing that you need, but really in a way that will qualify it for funding sources that are out there. So most public funding that you would get from the state, for example, is really restricted to if projects that are serving the very lowest income, homeless, and people with special needs. So if that's what your need is, and of course, we all have that need to some degree, but otherwise it's very hard to get state funding. And I think we all need to be thinking about that as a set of communities, especially island communities, about how we can advocate for more state funding for affordable housing for the islands. It's probably not the same for Whidbey, but I find myself frequently saying here, we can't commute our way out of this problem. You can't commute to Lopez Island in any kind of realistic way because of the cost. So we're stuck with who we have, and and the amount of land that we have. And also land and infrastructure costs have risen substantially. And I like the idea of trying to get the county to reduce some of the sewer hookup and water hookup fees that have add a lot to each development. Next slide, please. This is just a shot of our property that is right in Lopez Village, and the Children's Center is that yellow and orange building behind there. This is right on Fisherman Bay Road, and we expect to finish this in October, and you may wonder how, because there's nothing being built there, but I'll show you in a minute. The county issued an RFP for this land. It's a little less than an acre. We had competition from the CLT, but ultimately, I think it was felt that we really needed to get some rental housing, and so they chose us, even though we didn't have a track record. And they ultimately agreed to having 6 units there. It should have only had 4, but we had a density bonus for the affordability. And 3 units will be to serve households at 80% of median and 3 at 115%. That's what the county wanted, but we actually wanted to go lower than that. And so our pro formas and our budgets were built around 3 units at 60% of median and 3 at 80% of median. So that's what we're going to try to hit with our budget. The operating income from those rents will support a part-time property manager. So we don't have any, property management companies on the island, and it would be really expensive to bring one in. So we've decided to do it ourselves. So we have a part-time staff person starting this week, actually, and she'll be doing the regular resident management, lease up, all the paperwork, and then we'll be contracting out for any repairs and maintenance with island contractors. We explored many different building options here. And one of the problems on Lopez is that there are actually quite a few construction companies, big and small, well, not big, but good sized. And all of them are like 2 and 3 years out before they can take on another project. And that's really hard when you're developing affordable housing, because what you really need is some certainty, when your funding is going to come in and when the construction will happen. And it gets very, very complicated with a lot of different funding sources that you're managing. So we ultimately opted for a modular prefabricated homes. And we liked the sustainable, modern, and efficient design. Modular buildings also provide the advantage of fast construction and with a predictable timeline. So our 6 homes were built between basically February and they were just placed on their foundations today, but they were actually finished probably a month ago and they were stored. So it's much faster than stick built. And also the budget is really, it doesn't vary as much as a stick built construction project would. So the only place we really ran into some extra costs that we hadn't anticipated was in finally grading this piece of property and realizing that the foundations needed to be higher on one side, and that actually added several $1,000s. So basically we're very happy with our choice of modular homes. Next slide, please. So a little bit about Fish Bay Cottages. As I mentioned, there are 6 units. They are each 2-bedroom. It's the exact same floor plan in each home. They are 843 square feet, and they're on less than an acre in Lopez Village. As I mentioned, we're housing Lopez. We developed the project, and we will be managing the rental units. And also that we competed for county surplus property. So I'm not sure that we will do every project this way, but I think that is working out so well that we very may well choose. We had a local construction company do all the site development, including up to the foundations, and then they'll do the finish work. But as I mentioned, the company that built the prefabricated homes is called Method Homes. And they're out of their factory is in Linden, Washington. And they are known for very high-end homes, and they've built a lot in the San Juan Islands. But we approached them and they were very excited to work with us. And I think they're excited to open this new line of business with other nonprofits. Sorry, can you change the next slide, please? So before you say anybody looks at these numbers and says, well, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense because it shows our sources as higher than our expenses. And I wish that were true, but it's really not. And there's an accounting error in there that I wasn't able to figure out. But basically, we did get $600,000 from our REIT fund. So as Carl was mentioning earlier, San Juan County does collect a REIT tax, and they use it exclusively for affordable housing. We got a bank loan from the Washington Community Reinvestment Association, and they're very used to lending to nonprofits, so they're great to work with. We got one foundation grant, and that was from the Norcliffe Foundation, and really it was because somebody on the island knew some board members. It's not necessarily their sweet spot for funding. But the really remarkable thing is that we raised over $1 million from the community, from individuals on the island who recognized the need and felt that they could contribute. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more in a minute. As you can see, the land, it ended up costing us $6,100, but the soft costs is not insignificant, and the other category of reserves and fees and taxes and permits, it really adds up and adds to the cost. So while the construction of the home is $244,000, it actually adds up to almost $400,000 when you add all those other costs. Next slide, please. So the founders of the organization decided that the very first project would focus on rentals for essential workers. And I don't think that they had an actual definition in mind. And this was before COVID, before that phrase became well known. But ultimately, this is what we came up with as our what we categorize as essential workers. So people in public safety, caregivers, education, utilities. And we kind of asked ourselves, what would happen if there was an emergency, or, suddenly we were cut off, the island was cut off from the mainland, or, there was some other, dramatic occurrence. These are the people that you really want to be on the island and able to work. The second group of food service includes retails and restaurants and also farms. There's quite a few small farms on the island. And then nonprofit organizations and actual construction companies. And group 3 is really all other workers. So these 6 units are designated for essential workers. And we're imagining that we're going to be able to pick people from group 1 and group 2. And we don't expect that this is going to be an easy process. So we ultimately decided that we would use a 2-step process for renting. And actually, next slide, please. Oops, that's another slide from in the factory, the homes, one of the homes being built. And you can see that it's all indoors. It doesn't matter what the weather is. And this is a picture that the area right in front will be a deck. And they're really, I was able to go in one today, and they're really lovely houses. Next slide. So tenant selection. We made this matrix because we couldn't wrap our heads around how we were going to have different income levels and also different essential worker categories. But this is what we came up with. So we're imagining that there will be some people in group 1 in the high priority area who are in the lower income, and some in the higher income level, and so on. So what we did was we set up a 2-stage process. We asked people to submit a pre-application, which is essentially said, what field, who's your employer, and what is your income. And those 2 pieces of information will allow us to kind of put all these applications in those different buckets. And then we'll have a lottery, a random number generator to actually pick the names, because it's a small island and none of us wanted to be in charge of choosing who was going to be actually in these units. But we figured that this was the fairest way. So we don't have to go into detail on the income levels, but it can get confusing because it actually varies by household size. And our median income in San Juan County now is about $75,000. So that's up there, and it's why we have such a we have a really a challenge in that we have the lowest earned income of anywhere in the state, but we have the second highest housing prices. And so you can see that there's a mix match there. Next slide, please. Is there a next slide? Oh, there's one of the homes coming off the ferry. That was very exciting. Next slide. So I want to talk just a little bit about ways that local governments can support affordable housing. And Carl touched on some of these. And the ones with a check mark are ones that we actually were able to take advantage of. So rental housing is strongly noted in our comprehensive plan and our housing needs assessments and things like that. There's really a clear understanding, I think, growing understanding that rental housing is necessary. And we in the islands are kind of interesting. I know you're having another CLT person on later. San Juan, Orcas, and Lopez all have very established, long-standing community land trusts. But Orcas is the only, Opal on Orcas Island is the only one that also does rental housing. The others are only doing homeownership. I would say that zoning and land use designations, it's difficult. Like we can barely do ADUs. We're actually just working on some tiny home legislation, but it is very difficult to find property that's appropriate and then can have enough density to make a difference. In this case, we did get surplus property. That's great. And I think ours in our county, it's designated for affordable housing. So if you can get that in your area, that would be great. We also have the local funding source, the REIT funds, which is very, very important when you are then applying to other places to say that that our local government is supportive of this. We did not get any special treatment under permitting, although it went pretty fast. So I think, well, 6 months. I don't know if that's fast or not, but that's how long it took us to get our permit. And then property tax treatment, we should get a deal on our property tax because it is affordable housing. Next slide, which I think is the last one. Oh, community support. That's the one that's so important. So we, as you notice from the budget, got significant financial support from the island. Excuse me. We started with a sort of a relationship-based fundraising strategy where people who knew a lot of people did a lot of asks, and we got some very large gifts right off the bat, 125,000 from one couple and some similar ones. And that really helped us gain some momentum. We also did significant community outreach, lots of, newsletters and other ways to reach out to residents and get them to help us. Everybody on Lopez really acknowledges the lack of housing as a problem. So it's not a problem. It's not the issue to convince them of the problem. It's convincing them that they should invest in these homes. One thing that we did was we looked back over tax assessor records since 2012, and we made a list of all the people who had bought new homes or property that paid over $500,000 for them in that time period. And then we sent them all a letter and said, welcome to Lopez. And by the way, we would love to have your support. And I think we did get a number of donations from that. So the fundraising really has taken, I think they started in 2019 and we finished probably in June for this project. So it's a long-term commitment. We are a working board. We have no staff, but we have people with experience, relevant experience. We have someone who used to be an economist from HUD and then went into multifamily housing finance. We have a construction manager. We have an engineer. We have somebody who has experience in property management. So this group that was pulled together really is responsible for everything. And we're just praying that nobody gets burned out and leaves. And then I think the other way that the community can really support is like a gift of land. And that hasn't happened for us yet, but it's not out of the question that somebody could decide to leave, a few acres, of a parcel to one of the organizations on the island. So we'll keep our fingers crossed about that. Next slide, please. This picture was taken today from a drone, actually. And this is the day that the houses were set. They each come in two pieces, and the one that's in the middle there hanging from the crane will be moved. It'll be actually flipped around, and that plywood side will meet with that plywood side of the other greenhouse. And they set two of the houses yesterday and the rest of them today. And it was really something to watch. It was really amazing how they did it. So With that, I'll wrap up and just say that I'm happy to answer any questions, and we're excited about our next project, which we don't have yet, but we're certainly looking for land and ready to go again. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Melora. How exciting. And just today, it's happening now. How exciting. And
Yeah.
what a good way to figure it out. Wow. Our next person up is Joanne Pelant from Island County Housing Resource. She is our Island County Housing Resource Coordinator, and we'll talk about the essential workforce housing, the current Island County programs that we have going. And I already have a few questions for her in the Q&A, Joanne, but please go ahead with your presentation. Thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you for having me. We're excited to be able to listen to all your great speakers and learn and partner with you into the future. Next slide. So I first want to just talk a little bit about what we do here at the Department of Human Services in Island County. We are one of many departments, of course, within the Island County. Within the Department of Human Services, we have 9 small divisions. Housing is one of them. And together, we you can kind of think about us as part of the broad safety net, if you will, along with a lot of our great partner agencies that are out there, and churches and other organizations that provide really important services for low-income households, folks that are struggling with homelessness, and a lot of the work that we do with them. I just want to kind of, as an aside, clarify that we're not the Housing Authority of Island County. We get a lot of calls asking to get on the Section 8 list or apply for their housing. But the Housing Authority is a very separate entity. The county commissioners do appoint the board to the Housing Authority, but they really are a separate entity and really work with the HUD and the federal government for the most part. We also, within our little division of housing, we are the lead agency with the Department of Commerce Housing Division. Some of our work is driven by legislation, and that work kind of comes through the Department of Commerce Housing Division with policies and procedures or grants that come through. And most counties now are structured in a way that they're the lead agency with the Department of Commerce Housing Division. We serve on a number of statewide committees. We staff the Housing Advisory Board that looks at applications that come in from RFPs that we put out for the funding that we have, and make recommendations to the Board of County Commissioners. We also staff the Housing Provider Network. Some of you have probably participated in some of the task forces that we've supported over the years. I've been in this position for 10 years, and there's been a lot of forums and task forces and community conversations and meetings around affordable housing. And I really, really like Mayor Chaplin's statement where he said it's time to stop studying and start partnering and creating affordable housing units. And we totally agree with that. We also manage state grants, funding, and contracts in our department. And then we're responsible for implementing some of the state and federal mandates. For an example, the annual homeless point in time count, coordinated entry, and we have the Housing Support Center here in our department. We also do regular updates to the homeless housing plans. And of course, we collect a lot of data and provide reports. The other part that is not on here that we do is we do work on trying to bring together owners of properties and regional developers to see if we can facilitate a partnership to bring affordable housing into the county. Right now, we have a couple conversations going with local property owners and outside developers looking at a potential partnership. Next slide. So this slide shows the funds that we oversee. The two main funds that we have had for now many years are from the document recording fees. Legislature passed in 2002 Senate House Bill 2060, which established an affordable housing fund. The revenue that we generate on an annual basis is around $162,701. There are income limits on these funds, and it's for our low to very low income households. And the income limit is at 50% AMI and below. The other fund that comes from the document recording fees was passed in 2005, Senate House Bill 2163, that established a homeless housing fund. As you can see, the annual revenue from that is much greater than what we get in the Affordable Housing Fund. It's a little over $1 million. And again, the income limit on those funds is 50% AMI. The newest fund that we have begun collecting is from the House Bill 1406 that someone earlier mentioned. We did discuss this with all of our other jurisdictions, and it was agreed to sign an interlocal agreement and have these funds administered and given oversight along with the document recording fees. Right now, those funds are just being collected. There hasn't been any decision on how those funds will be used. But as you can see, the annual revenue I have here at $187,445. Actually, that's not quite right. There is a maximum that we can collect every year, and it's around $145,000. But collectively, you can see that we have some local funds. Most of the funds in the Affordable Housing Fund and the Homeless Housing Fund do go back out the door. So they support the Housing Support Center and staff, and we contract with a lot of our partner agencies that provide a lot of homeless housing and supportive services that serve just a lot of households in our community with those funds. Over the years, we have not put out all of the funds, and so we have from time to time built up a reserve with those funds. And it's been really significant because since 2002, some of the developments that we have used these funds for is Margie's house in Oak Harbor, land purchase for the Sunnyview apartments developed by the Housing Authority. In years past, there were land purchases for Saratoga Housing and Habitat for Humanity. And then most recently, we did use a significant portion of the reserve to purchase the land in Oak Harbor that now has the stabilization center on it. And then the remaining parcel will be used for the development of affordable housing. And we're working on an RFQ right now to advertise in hopes of getting a developer to work with to begin to develop affordable housing on that parcel in Oak Harbor. Next slide. So that kind of covers what our normal book of business is. But in February of 2020, as most people know, we shifted to really COVID crisis management. And, you know, things shut down. A lot of our staff work from home. But we started through the housing, we started getting significant numbers of grants. And I won't go through them all, but this is a list of all of the grants that we've gotten since February of 2020. Much of it is rent, utility, and mortgage assistance. But one of the shelter grant there allowed for a local homeless provider, the Whidbey Homeless Coalition, to purchase a parcel for a permanent location for a night-to-night shelter. We've got a couple of programs there, or one program that's a longer term rental assistance for homeless population, and of course, mortgage and utility assistance. And then we've just gotten news that we're getting a new contract coming up in as of October 1st with more rental assistance funding. You know, the whole goal has been from February 2020 to date is to keep people in their homes and minimize people falling into homelessness. And you probably heard nationally, there's been a lot of news about, you know, a lot of this federal fund has not gotten out into the hands of the people that need it. I'm happy to say that we shifted very quickly here and worked quickly with Department of Commerce, got contracts signed through our commissioners that worked with us very rapidly to get contracts going. We worked with our sub-grantees and got contracts done with them, and we got up and running very quickly. So we have served literally thousands of households, and some of them second and third times, by helping them stay in their homes. Next slide. So this next topic gets really to the heart of, I think, what this conference is all about. And it is a new funding opportunity. And this is the first time we're actually talking about this publicly. But the commissioners have suggested that we work with the Housing Advisory Board and begin to do some community outreach to get a pulse on the community on what their thoughts are on House Bill 1590. In June 2020, the state legislature passed House Bill 1590, and it's an act that allows counties to increase their local sales and use tax by up to 1/10 of 1%, specifically for affordable housing and related services. We estimate the annual revenue that we would get here in Island County right now anyway, would be a little over $1 million, and that would be revenue that would come year after year after year. As we look around the region and we see the communities that are successfully adding affordable housing units, they have developed local fund sources to support and encourage local and regional public and private developers to partner with and create then a pipeline of affordable housing projects. And that's really one of the great benefits we see if this were to be passed, is that we could begin to leverage these dollars and work with local developers to the extent they're interested in being part of the solution, or attract regional developers to consider developing affordable housing here. Next slide. So as I said, the estimated annual revenue is a little over $1 million. That impact on taxpayer would be about 1 cent of sales tax for every $10 purchase, or a dime for every $100 of retail sales. There are some limits or requirements of how these funds can be used, but it is quite flexible, or it covers a broad range of things that these funds can be used for. The minimum of 60% of the funds can be used for construction of affordable housing, constructing of a mental and behavioral health related facilities, and then operations and maintenance, which is really, really important, because in the past, many funds that have been available have been either for construction or acquisition or supportive services, but operations and maintenance has not typically been allowed. So this is significant, would be a significant improvement for us here in Island County. The remaining funds, around 40%, could be used for housing related services or operations, delivery or evaluation of mental and behavioral health treatment programs and services. Next slide. So from our perspective, of course, we see that there are many benefits in this. And this slide lists just a few of them, but it would bring a significant increase in local funds with local control, giving Island County a consistent stream of new funds. As mentioned before, these funds could then be leveraged, could leverage significant state and federal funds in partnership with other public or private organizations. One quick example of that, one of the developers that we're working with right now and one of the property owners is considering applying to the current Housing Trust Fund NOFA for rapid acquisition of properties. And within that is a requirement of a local match. And based on the purchase acquisition cost of that property, the local match is about $1 million. And so we've kind of, over the last few years, expended any reserve that we've had in our affordable housing dollars. And so we're not sure if we would have the funds actually to partner with this developer. So we're working on that right now. But these funds would be able to be used for that type of a thing. Having a local fund like this, we could quickly deploy resources to respond to new opportunities or emergent needs. Pre-development costs is one thing that we hear about a lot from local developers that many times aren't covered. And so again, these funds could be used for pre-development dollars. And I should note that obviously they have to be have units, either all of their units or some of their units at 60% for incomes at 60% AMI and below. And then really at the end of the day, we could begin to develop and support a pipeline of affordable housing projects for years to come. And then of course, one of the benefits would be to begin to create housing that would make possible for the essential workers that everybody's been talking about to afford to live here and be available for the jobs that need to be filled in our community. We see this as a historic opportunity to begin to make an impact in workforce housing issues. Next slide. So where are we right now? So as I mentioned, county commissioners are requesting us to work with the Housing Advisory Board Subcommittee and begin to do community outreach and gather feedback for the commissioners to consider later on in 2021. We have had a number of meetings with the subcommittee of the Housing Advisory Board, and we have kind of honed in what our message is. We've developed some tools, a question and answer document. We've created a letter that to be sent to stakeholders, and we've worked on talking points and another kind of template letter that people could use to add to then send into the Board of County Commissioners. So our next steps are really to begin community outreach and sharing details of this measure. We will begin to make lists to send letters out to stakeholders and the Q&A. And within the letter to the stakeholders, there really is an ask. And the ask is simple: for people to consider if they support this, to send letters of support to us that could be shared with the Board of County Commissioners. We will begin to schedule specific presentations with organizations, businesses, and agencies. We would really love to recruit some ambassadors to come along and partner with us that could also go out and share this message into the community. And then at the end of the day, when the Board of County Commissioners do schedule a meeting to consider this tax measure, we would also really like to invite everybody to come to that meeting that's in support of it. And next slide. Actually, that was my last slide. So it's a really brief summary. We would love to get some of these tools, message tools out to everyone on this call. And so if anyone has interest in that, and certainly, of course, we'll work with you in connecting. And thanks so much for having us.
Thank you, Joanne. It's so much great information. And we really are running quite behind, but I think it's really important, everything what people have to offer. So I'm going to reassure again the folks that are here and they had a schedule to speak at a certain time that you will have your chance, but please do try to keep within your budget. And I know that my next speaker has already told me she's shortening hers a little so we can catch up, and that is our wonderful Brigid Reynolds, our former community planner at the city of Langley, who was here at the start of this whole event and is now able to finish with us as a contract planner for Compass Rose planning. And Brigid, I'll give it to you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Rhonda, and thanks everybody else. This is quite a lot of information that we'll need to digest after the fact. So I'm going to speak briefly around Langley's community plan, as well as some of the recent code amendments that have been made. So as you're all familiar with our comprehensive plan, a broad overarching document that addresses a wide range of issues, and of course housing, there's a housing element included in there. One of the main goals in that plan is about encouraging the availability of affordable housing to all economic segments, and that we're developing policy, et cetera, regulations to promote a variety of residential densities. The slide has gone away. Promoting, can you change the view back to the slide, please? Okay, so yeah, that we're promoting creating different housing types and residential densities. So how we do this is that we implement the community plan through a whole bunch of different mechanisms, and also decisions that are made by council and staff. You know, it's about establishing budget priorities, developing and implementing strategies and programs, and also preparing and amending and implementing new policies and regulations. So in the case of Langley's community plan, comprehensive plan, it includes over 40 goals and policies that support integrating multifamily housing into single-family neighborhoods, using innovative planning strategies, and encouraging various types of housing types and densities throughout the city. The regulation changes that we focused on the last few years, you know, PAB has done a lot of hard work in this regard, but it's been around reducing barriers and creating opportunities to increase new housing development. But we also know that those regulations in and of themselves, you know, just building new housing units alone doesn't create affordable housing. You know, there isn't this trickle-down effect that happens in the case of affordable housing, as we're seeing now in our current market. But zoning, we need supportive zoning, we need supportive policy in order to facilitate affordable housing. It's one part of the solutions, you know, that Carl spoke to. And Langley has actually undertaken a number of the initiatives that Carl spoke on. So multifamily infill, for example, it's about a recent code amendment that council adopted, allows multifamily units to be developed in single family neighborhoods. And so we're creating a mix of housing types in neighborhoods. And this is an overlay zone that applies to 4 different zone districts. The approval process is streamlined. There's additional height provisions in 2 of the zone districts where there's affordable housing units provided. And we have received an application most recently for a property redevelopment on 3rd Street using this code. Council also this year adopted a planned unit development code, and this applies to lots that are 5 acres in size or greater. And what this does is it's really looking at a development as more of a whole new neighborhood. And so this is permitting a wide mix of housing types and also uses. So commercial uses could also be supported, is also permitted in the PUD code. A development agreement. So this is a legal agreement between council, the city, and the developer. And that is a required element of any PUD development, and it includes affordable housing requirements. There is a future application that we're anticipating on Coles Valley, which is a 40-acre parcel that's just south of the wastewater treatment plant. Another area that's been talked about is the impact of short-term rentals on the city. And we adopted a new short-term rental regulation. Now, this is an annual licensing program, which is quite different than most jurisdictions. We've established 4 different types of short-term rentals. And what the code also does is limit whole home short-term rentals to a maximum of 30 per year. So before this code was adopted, we knew that, you know, this use was happening, that people were renting their house, Airbnbs and so on, but it wasn't permitted. So now we've established a clear baseline, and we're also working with a third-party monitoring program. And that's really been helpful in terms of allowing us to know what's happening in real time. ADUs, ADUs were already permitted in the code. We've now expanded that to allow for, to permit for 2 ADUs, one attached and one detached, where there's sewer. Where there's not sewer, you could have 1 ADU. And then again, streamline the application process, reduce parking requirements, and we are seeing more ADUs being constructed in the last couple of years. With that same code amendment, we amended the code to permit tiny homes and tiny home communities to a maximum of 10 units in zone districts where there's sewer. And you're probably familiar with Tiny Homes in the Name of Christ. They're moving forward with their project on Camino. We also rezoned over 40 lots in the area between Park and De Bruin, 1st and 4th. And what that did was to rezone them, upzone them from RS 7200, so minimum lot size of 7,200 square feet to 5,000 square feet. So that enables some lot line, boundary line adjustments to happen to, again, allow for some infill. I think back it was in 2013, council adopted an innovative affordable housing code. And that code, modeled after Bellingham, I think it was, provides for density bonus provisions of like a 1-to-1 for affordable housing units, and also allows for some reduction of construction standards. And in the city, you may be familiar with Upper Langley, that's on Al Anderson, across from the cemetery. That's a co-housing neighborhood, and they developed using this code. And they have a total of 16 houses that will be developed, and I think they're pretty darn close to being built out. Those units are deed restricted, and they will remain permanently affordable. So these are some of the more recent regulation changes that the city's made, you know, to reduce some barriers and so on, increase opportunity. But as mentioned, regulation changes doesn't create affordability in and of itself. And we really do need to have those supporting policies and regulations in order to develop those wide range of housing types. So, you know, we've heard from some, and we'll hear from some more folks about different tools and strategies that we can potentially use here in Langley and South Whidbey. And, you know, I think it's becoming pretty clear that we need to be thinking about partnerships. Who would we be partnering with? Looking at how we might find different funding sources, because we need to have a wide range of funding sources. And then, of course, we also need a supportive council and a supportive community. And I think everybody has mentioned the need for a tremendous amount of persistence. So with that, I will pass it on to the next speaker. Thank you.
All right, and you can all see the great work that has already happened in our little village by the sea under Brigid's great leadership, and we're very proud of where we're already at, but have a lot of work to go to see real impact, which is who our next speaker, what our next speaker is, Michael Hassig, who's going to speak with us about the success they've had in Carbondale, Colorado. Michael, you've been very patient to wait, and thank you so much for being with us. We've been waiting to hear from you.
Well, thank you very much. And great information, and some really terrific steps have already been taken. And so I'm calling in from Carbondale, Colorado, which is a town of about 7,000 people. We're located 30 miles northwest of Aspen, Colorado, in what was originally ranching and farming country. It was also home to coal miners, people like that. The population since 1980 has grown from 2,000 to 7,000. And so that's a pretty steady 3% growth rate over that whole range of time. So a lot of our affordable housing imperatives really were in response to the quick growth, which took everyone by surprise. By 2000, the community had grown to 5,000. And at that point, the Planning Commission and the community essentially drew a boundary and said, we're not going to expand anymore. And we've really held to that boundary despite finding room for another 2,000 people in town. I got here in 1990 and I spent 10 years on the Planning Commission as chairman and commissioner. I spent 8 years as mayor. Now I'm director of the regional fire, one of the directors of the regional fire district. So these issues have been in the forefront, not only of my public service, but also involved in a lot of the work that I do as an architect. Couple of things that came to mind. I had a more organized presentation, which people have brought up so many great ideas that I'm going to improvise a little bit here, just to make a couple of points. The first is about affordable housing and the importance of thinking of affordable housing in terms of deed restriction. You've got to set up programs that provide these opportunities either for ownership or rental, but you need mechanisms to make it permanent. There has to be some form of deed restriction on the properties where this is occurring. You need methodologies for income qualification. Often there are equity qualifications as well. These things need to be permanent, and typically when they're in the sales realm, we build in appreciation caps, normally either CPI or 3%, not on an annual basis, but on an overall term of ownership basis. All of these things are a way to keep affordable housing affordable. Carbondale presently has about 2,500 dwelling units. Perhaps 10% of them fall under some form of affordable housing. If we go to the next slide, that would be great. This is just an image of the historic downtown. And the next slide is the first principal large-scale affordable housing project, which is about 26 years old now. At the time, there was a large property on the edge of town which had been annexed but never developed. And developers came in with a plan for a private 400-unit golf course, private golf course, gatehouse, so forth and so on. And it was not very well received in the community. By the end of the application process for this rezoning, redevelopment, development plan, however you want to term it, the town increased the density of the project to 565 units, 60 of which were affordable in the 80 to 120 of AMI price range. There were another 50 allowed ADUs, which were controlled by the owners of houses. I think this house on the left, Scott Chaplin, your mayor, lived in at one point. If you go to the next slide, there's another view of that same neighborhood. Small units, 1,100, 1,200 square feet, some duplexes, some single family, narrow streets, limited parking, but a very successful, stable neighborhood that has maintained over this 26-year period. Talking about, so this is an example of our first attempt at what's termed inclusionary zoning, which uses the development process. Now, normally, if you're dealing with an annexation or a rezoning, for the developer, you're creating value. And so the calculus we used was, within that model, then, there ought to be some demonstrable benefit to the community. And so in the case of this first project called River Valley Ranch, 10% of the units were deed restricted affordable units. The next slide is another project done a few years later in partnership with the Aspen Skiing Company, which has a lot of employees who live down valley. It's called Cater Grove. There are 30 deed restricted affordable units there. Some of them got upwards of 150 of AMI just because they wanted a broader range, but it was a project where the skiing company couldn't find land to build on in Pitkin County nor in Aspen, so they recognized that Carbondale was a good place to do that. This is, again, a project that's more than 20 years old, very stable, looks great now with mature plantings, a real successful project. Next slide, if you would please, shows what is housing that was built by the Catholic Archdiocese. And it is 60 to 80% of AMI, supported by HUD and by the State Housing Finance Agency. And that's a project, again, very stable. It's another 60 units. And so that's just kind of demonstrating the range of partners. This one, the town really facilitated by rezoning a parcel and moving through the process pretty quickly. There are typically in the town code, there are waivers for affordable housing in terms of some fees and tap fees and so forth, which can help with the affordability of those projects. Next slide, please. If you would, this is the latest project to open. It's 30 units of less than 80% AMI rental units, built by a nonprofit that's based in Aspen and Pitkin County, called the Aspen Pitkin Employee Housing Nonprofit. And this was built in an area of the industrial park where the developer approached the town and said, can we use this for affordable housing? And it's been a great success. And I think they really built a really beautiful building. So you've got the real mix of partners. In this case, again, the town participated in terms of contributing to construction costs and fee waivers and so forth to try and assist with the affordability of this. The next project, if you would, the next slide, shows apartment buildings that are under construction. When Scott spoke in the beginning, he said very little rental housing had been built in Langley in the last 20 years. And we've had exactly the same experience here, that virtually none was built between 1990 and 2015. And only in the last 3 to 5 years have we begun to see focused redevelopment, and that the rental market is supporting the construction of buildings, that the rents are high enough to pay for the construction, and that investors are interested in rental projects. These rental projects also include a housing affordability component. After the first River Valley Ranch project, our affordable housing regulations jumped from 10 to 20% of the units must meet a range of affordable standards. And so that is also done here in these rental units. It's a little bit tricky, and it requires a fair amount of negotiation and legal work, because you're essentially trying to control rents through an agreement that you are trying to make permanent, even if the building ownership changes and so forth. So there's a lot of legwork that goes into making these things workable. And I think I'll cut my talk short and look forward to questions about the nature of affordable housing, of inclusionary zoning, and the forging of partnerships, because there's a lot of good people on the talk tonight, and I'll defer to them. So thanks.
Thank you so much. We have so many questions, and I'm realizing how much information we're trying to squeeze into this 2 hours. And we're going to have to readjust a little bit here as we come to 20 minutes before the end of our program. So I really don't want to cut Kim or Orin short. So let's get right on to our next speaker, Kim Toskey, who is the CEO of Hopes and Homes Land Trust. And not only is she our neighbor in Mukilteo doing the good work, but she's the director of the Northwest Community Land Trust Coalition, and she has a lot to share. So I'll pass it off to you right away. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Rhonda. So I will jump right in with a basic explanation of Community Land Trust. And Michael Hassig was singing my favorite song, Permanent Affordability Deed Restrictions, Permanent Affordability Deed Restrictions. That is the nature of Community Land Trust. The first word in Community Land Trust is community. So every CLT is a little bit different based on the community where they are located. But what is common is that through the legal instrument of a leasehold, the homeowner buys the improvements, the community retains ownership of the land, and the lease is transferable and inheritable for 99 years. It's also renewable for a second 99 years. And what that does is it keeps the community investment in the community so that the spread between what is affordable now and what the market price would be grows over time. Go ahead and put it to the next slide. Thank you. So one of the most important aspects of affordable home ownership is that it moves people along the spectrum, so out of rental housing and into home ownership. Here in Mukilteo, we have an apartment complex that has gone in. Part of it is a tax credit project, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But that apartment complex has 4 and 5 bedroom apartments. Mind blowing. Not since I was a military brat and living in military housing did I even hear of a 4 or a 5 bedroom apartment. The reason that they're having to build such big apartments is because there's no place for tenants to move into the home ownership arena. Go ahead, next step. Next slide, sorry. So one of the things that people frequently ask is, oh yeah, but you know, those people and who buys a CLT and what about them? So prior to being CEO of Homes and Hope Community Land Trust, I was a mortgage loan officer specializing in first-time home buyer loans, and in particular layered financing and deep subsidy mortgages. And so I did, in that capacity, I did more than 100 community land trust mortgage purchases. And I also consulted with about a half dozen CLTs across the country and worked with nearly all of the community land trusts here in the Northwest. So this list, which is almost impossible to read, is a list of the job titles of every CLT loan that I did, CLT buyer, and I have many of them memorized, so I'll just name some off. Ferry dock worker, librarian, health aide, education aide, artist, yoga instructor, mechanic, school maintenance supervisor, wait staff, dim sum chef, firefighter, retired police officer. And then the very bottom, you can see that the last job title at the very bottom of the heart is mom. Yes, because lots of parents buy CLTs. Go ahead, advance forward. Oh, my last slide didn't make it in. Okay, the last slide was only the most important one. That's what I was supposed to talk about. Sorry. Originally, when we were talking about what I would talk with you about, it was like, what is a CLT? How does it work? And as Rhonda and I talked more recently, she said, you know, we really need to know some strategies, and we need to know who has rental in the CLT. So remember I said CLTs, the first word in community land trust is community. So every community is a little bit different. And that is the beauty of it. Here in Washington, or sorry, here in the Northwest, the CLTs that have rental properties as a significant part of their program would include Opal that Melora mentioned earlier up on Orcas, Housing Resources Bainbridge on Bainbridge Island, St. Joseph CLT in Lake Tahoe, Nevada, and Home Trust of Skagit in Skagit County. And in fact, Home Trust of Skagit was started based on rental properties. So they didn't add it in after the fact. That was the start to Home Trust of Skagit. I will send to Rhonda this list of resources so that she has it and can distribute it out. But when you are talking about having a community land trust, there are several ways to get started. The way that I did it is that I was a CLT practitioner, had a lot of experience with CLTs. I have a board that has 2 people who have also worked for more than 15 years in the CLT world, and then several other board directors who were familiar with various aspects of affordable housing and workforce development. So we were able to launch independently. Currently, right now, we have more than 6 startups around the state of Washington, and most of them are launching under another organization. Within that launching under another organization model, there's 2 different ways to approach it. Number one is that you launch under an organization that is similar, either a feeder organization, like a resource nonprofit that would potentially be dealing with housing stability issues, and then they would feed into the home ownership and or rental part of the CLT. Or you can launch under another CLT with a regional subboard and then break off when you become sustainable. That is the important thing to remember about community land trusts, is it really takes a minimum of 50 units before you begin to have enough homes in portfolio to sustain the organization. When you put rental properties in there also, then you need to have operational funds as well as development funds. So when you think about starting a community land trust, you have that independence completely on your own, but that's really going to be, it's important to have seed capital. It's important to have experienced people, and someone needs to be driving the bus. There is a startup in the state of Washington right now that has a working board, but nobody's actually in charge and nobody's actually working full time. I am a full-time volunteer. This is my job. I work more than 40 hours a week doing it. And that is the key. Like, you have to have someone who is moving the work forward every day. So you can have an independent startup, but you need to have someone who is in charge, who is coordinating, who is working either as a volunteer or with pay, and you need to have seed capital. Or you can start up under another organization, either a CLT, and then break off when you are sustainable, or under another organization that has a similar, that is aligned philosophically, but maybe would be more like a feeder organization. The other thing I want to mention is that it's really important that you access, as a community, as people engaged in the conversation, access the resources that are available. Grounded Solutions Network has a startup hub with lots of recommended reading and lots of stock forms. The Northwest Community Land Trust Coalition, which I am the membership director. We have a peer mentoring program. We also have sample documents, and we have our annual gathering in May, this coming May 2022. It will be May 3 through 5 in Chelan. We are also going to be doing a hybrid session this year. So we will have online access as well as in-person access. I highly recommend that anyone engaged in real conversation about community land trusts attend one of the gatherings personally, and then have many people attend online so that you can get some of those really good conversations. And then a little shout out on September 22nd, we are having a special online session of the history of community land trusts. Lisa Byers, the executive director of Opal CLT. She's also a founding member of both the Northwest CLT Coalition and the National Coalition CLT Network, which is the precursor to Grounded Solutions. Lisa Byers will be doing history of the CLTs, and then we will be showing the award-winning movie Arc of Justice, which talks about the roots of the Community Land Trust. As I said, I'm sorry, my last slide didn't make it into the deck. I will send it to Rhonda. She will distribute it out to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. No, we do have that, it looks like, and we're sorry we missed it on the PowerPoint. We absolutely will get it out there on the recording of this. I want to say that we'll be going over tonight, unfortunately, but we want to make sure everybody has their time. And boy, that was a lot of great stuff. We look forward to working with you in the future on a land trust for our area, Kim. And I want to say that since we are going over, just be aware we are recording this and you can look at it at a different time. We probably will have to forego the Q&A since we are going over, but all of your questions will be answered and will be made available on our website with the answers. So please do continue to put your questions in the Q&A. And I'm sorry we won't be able to have the live Q&A tonight. So the next person up is our own Orin Kolaitis. Oh, I should have asked you how to pronounce your name, Orin. That was really bad. Who I've been able to be in touch with a lot. He is the CEO of the Island County Habitat for Humanity and has a lot to share with us about what we can do locally. Go ahead, Orin, take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity to discuss Habitat for Humanity of Island County's program. I'm going to apologize for my acoustics. We just moved into an office and I have blank walls. Definitely a pleasure to hear from Kimberly. We certainly share a family dynamic that we serve, which is truly the workforce. I mean, it showcased it very well. Next slide, please. So many of you know about Habitat, and to conserve time, I'm going to speak a little fast just to kind of get us on track if we can. So Habitat's vision is a world where everyone deserves a decent place to live. We offer a robust program and includes new construction and critical home repairs for income qualified families, just to name a couple. Next slide. One of the biggest components to this is our Habitat Land Trust. This community land trust model ensures that all Habitat homes are permanently affordable through our executed deed restricted ground lease. And we currently have over 37 homes built in our land trust in Island County. The difference when we say community land trust, and I just call us the Habitat Land Trust, is we do not have our homeowners on the board of directors, as it's a conflict with our Habitat covenant. We do have committees where Habitat homeowners and our community land trust members can sit on and weigh in onto the board. So other than that, we share a deed restricted ground lease for 99 years with the option to renew for another 99. Next slide. Applicants to our home ownership program demonstrate need, ability to repay, and a willingness to partner. Next slide. This is the current income statistics from HUD for Island County. Our current median income is $81,000, and Habitat serves families that are 80% or below the area median income. And we have an internal policy that will have a minimum income of $22,500. So that does not always track with 30% of the area median income. As we're very sustainable and we have a Fund for Humanity reserve, we can alter that to suit our community. Next slide, please. How our homes are affordable to buy. We remove the cost of land from the sale. We have sweat equity components from our home buyers. Volunteers participate in the build. We apply for grants for down payment assistance, construction cost, land acquisition, etc. And we require little to no down payment. Next one. Sweat equity requirements are 500 hours per signer on our new construction homes. And then for, whether it's a recycle that we do where we buy back a home, remodel it, and resell it to another income qualified family, the hours are different. And same thing with our repair program. Or critical home repairs have a sweat equity component as well, to align with our new construction. Next slide. So we have a land lease fee of $25 per month. Home buyers earn equity on their contribution at 1.5% annually. So future sales are restricted to income qualified buyers, and our homeowners pay property taxes and land taxes on the homes. Without our land trust model, we would have to buy back and resell our homes at the current market appraised value. Just to kind of hook out some pretty rough but fairly realistic numbers. With our land trust buyback and resale formulas, an average Habitat homeowner can earn roughly $40,000 after about 10 years of ownership. Habitat is able to buy back the home at roughly $90,000 below a non-land trust home. So we'll then rehab and sell to another income qualified buyer without raising the cost to the current market appraised value. And that's the real differential that Michael is referring to when we want to keep these at what we call permanently affordable. We're not always at that fair market or appraised value every time we resell. We keep them at an affordable price. Next slide, please. So the benefits of a Habitat being the builder and operating a land trust is strictly the efficiency and cost savings by not duplicating administrative salaries, overhead costs. There's no additional community land trust fees at the time of sale, post-sale follow-ups, and other with our home buyers. Habitat already has the policies and procedures in place to steward the land we hold in trust. This includes qualifying our home buyers, preparing mortgage documents, homeowner education, multiple check-ins during the first year, and yearly check-ins during the time of ownership. We also have the flexibility to adjust fees during a time of need. We hold escrow payments for paying property taxes on behalf of the homeowners, and the costs are lower to us when we choose to repurchase the home. Next slide. Some frequent questions we get, I won't go through them all, but the biggest one is, yes, the land is there for the homeowners to enjoy while they live there. By removing the cost of the land from the purchase and having resale restrictions in place in perpetuity ensures that we keep an affordable housing stock in Island County for many generations. This is a crucial component to having housing available for our workforce. And the foresight of this, I mean, it really shows today, and I'll kind of get into a little bit more, but Habitat has been building in Island County since 1998 and using our community land trust model since 2008. Homes that aren't in our trust that we have the potential to buy back, this is where it really showcases. Sometimes we have to make a hard decision on if we can even afford to buy that back at the current market appraisal rate. And if we can't, we lose that out of the affordability realm. So every house that is in our land trust that's a no-brainer. We can buy those back, they're affordable, we can rehab them, and then put that back into the affordability realm. So we often, buy the homes on the open market after transit, or kind of got myself out of track there, but with this resale formula and the earned equity that our homeowners get, it's not uncommon for them to buy homes on the open market if they're ready to make that transition from habitat. So we already have the tools in place to sustainably build permanently affordable homes in Island County. But to have a greater impact, we just can't do it by ourselves, right? We need community partners. And right now our biggest hurdle is acquiring and developing land. So there's so much to talk about, and I'm always happy to talk about affordable housing, but I know it's short. So I'm gonna end it with that, but please don't hesitate to reach out to me, anyone on my staff, and let's keep this conversation going. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And I'm sorry it is cut short. We will definitely be contacting you, Orin, in the future. I look forward to working with you. Next up, we have Greg Easton, who is a retired land use economist, and we are lucky to have him on our affordable housing working group. Greg, tell us about.
You're lucky to have me advancing the slides now too, in spite of occasional difficulties. But Carl and Joanne have both talked about potential revenue sources, and I would just quickly like to look at what that might translate into actual dollars and draw some conclusions about that. We talked about potential sales tax funds through the House Bill 1590, local government authorized to levy a 0.1% tax on taxable retail sales. As Joanne mentioned, the county has the right to authorize that tax first. But if they don't, the city could do that. But I think the important thing is, what would Langley's share of the total county program would be? Total taxable sales in Langley are about $50 million per year, as you see in the chart on the right. 0.1% sales tax on that amount would generate approximately $50,000 per year. It's a good number, but obviously it pales in comparison to the 1.1 million that could be generated countywide, and it suggests that that maybe those monies are best spent on a cooperative regional basis. We can look at property tax funding. The Langley assessed valuation for 2021 taxes is $348 million. Bond amount of $1 million. You can translate that into annual debt service. That would require an annual levy rate of 18 cents per 1,000 valuation. The cost to an owner of property valued at $400,000 would be $72. So $1 million in a lump sum is something that could probably have an impact on the affordable housing challenge, and a $72 annual bill doesn't sound unreasonable to me. And then finally, we talked about the real estate excise tax. The beauty about the real estate excise tax is that the affordable housing challenge is driven to a large extent by increases in property values. At least the real estate excise tax has the potential to capture a share of that increased value and put it back into the public realm. So Langley collects 0.5% real estate excise tax. Half of that can be used, is authorized to provide affordable housing and related services. That 0.25% tax in Langley generated about $60,000 in 2019. You can see that varies from year to year, but in those years when there's a lot of sales activity, the amount would be greater. So as I look at those kind of three comparative numbers, I kind of draw three conclusions. One in a lot of cases, what's generated within a single geographic area like Langley may not be the most productive use of those funds, and that by doing that on a more regional basis through a county initiative, you might be able to get more value for your contribution. But secondly, those different sources do add up. And I think the key is to start combining those uses, get a source of money that can be used when an opportunity arises. And I think as you start looking to making those combinations, you can really address some of the problems in the area. But I think the final point is that whatever the amount of those dollars is, it's important to leverage those dollars, combine them with other sources of nonprofit and private sources of money to get the most overall value from the dollars that are available in the community.
All right, well, here are all of the great folks that were going to be on our panel to answer your questions. I see people have put their more questions into the Q&A. Please continue to do so as we conclude our evening's presentation. I'm so sorry we can't have a live Q&A, but we will be contacting all of you panelists to answer some of the questions that have come up. And we can't thank you enough for being here and getting through this long meeting with a lot of information, and we really appreciate you all. I am now going to introduce the final person to speak, who is a member of our Affordable Housing Working Group and such a great asset to us. She used to work for the city of Langley in finance. She is an actual Langley resident, and she is the financial director of Goosefoot Community Fund, who we know is doing some exciting talk of workforce housing themselves. So I'm going to turn it over to Rose. I hope you will listen to her with great interest. Thank you.
Thanks, Rhonda. We all, in some way or another, are affected by the lack of affordability and availability of housing for our community. And when I look at the list of attendees, I've seen about 100 of you that are involved in some way in trying to find solutions. At our May event, we parsed out some of the specific demographics who are most personally affected in Langley and why. And we encourage you again to read the paper created from that presentation and to check your assumptions. I guarantee you will learn something new. That paper, however, doesn't even touch on some of the new national market disruptions that are starting to affect us locally. Yesterday, I received this letter in the mail, both at work for Goosefoot and in my personal mail. I can offer you a fast, trouble-free sale as well as a fair price and immediate cash. But this is old school paper. Redfin, Zillow, Open Door, and other iBuyers are turning home buying into an online sight unseen transaction, creating a mass market for house flipping as well as regular sales. 1 of every 22 homes now are bought by investors, not residents. And so if we think about the implications of the commodification of housing, we can recognize that the paradigm of our home, our community, has changed and will continue to change. And we must in turn innovate and advocate for the sake of affordability. That is what our speakers' contributions have represented. And we have people, you out there, who in our own community, who have dedicated themselves to bringing those models and creating new ones here. Brigid mentioned a few of those efforts, and the work group will make sure that we provide contact information for those of you who want to advertise and organize around other efforts. I'm currently involved in the Bayview Vision, which is a project exploring the feasibility of workforce housing development in the Bayview rural area of intensive development, which allows for multifamily development in unincorporated Greater Langley. And that effort is being steered by a group of local institutional landowners. And in the course of our work, we found that much of the informal affordable housing, both for rental or purchase on South Whidbey, is due to the generosity of local landowners who prioritize stable housing for our community above extracting maximum wealth from their resources. There are many such people in our community, though they aren't counted by the Census Bureau, and we don't have them on a list. But it's not enough to think that we can solve a global problem on our own or based merely on certain individuals' generosity. So as you get involved in these local efforts to create housing, please also consider getting involved at the county, state, and federal levels to advocate for a shift in the root causes of this problem. The housing pressures in rural areas like ours are finally becoming noticed, and the policymakers want to hear more from us and our ideas for solutions. And I'd like to recognize those who took the time to attend tonight. Greg Gilday, Kurt Gordon, Melanie Bacon, Craig Sear, and Peter Norton are people that I've seen out there attending throughout the entire evening. I want to thank them. And I want to end by handing off to another policymaker, Rhonda Salerno, Chair of Langley's Planning Advisory Board, to close.
Thank you, Rose. We live in a community with great potential to identify needs and allow sparks of creative solutions to flourish. But we need together to put our heads and hearts to make this equitable housing goal a reality. We need to continue to strengthen our relationships. I hope our two presentations, this and our last meeting, have given you inspiration to become involved and do something about the need for all of us to live and work together to everyone's benefit. Here is where this information lives on our City of Langley's website, and where you'll find the recording of tonight's meeting, PowerPoint, and Q&As in the near future. Please continue to join Langley and Island County in thinking and doing outside of the box to make affordable and attainable housing a reality. Show up and make your voices heard. We are all in this together, and it truly takes a village by the sea. Thank you all so much for spending your precious time tonight with us. You are heroes. We love you. And I will say goodnight for all of us at the Affordable Housing Working Group and the panelists, and we will hope to talk to you all in the future. Good night.